Awesome. Great. Okay, hey, this is us. This is the MacEwan NDP podcast. Let's do some introductions. I'm Dominic Ellis Kelly, and I'm the president of this club.
My name is Aiden Tiro. I'm the VP Social Media. And Tom?
I'm Thomas, and I'm the vice president.
I'm Nathan, and I have no title.
All right, and my name is Callan, no title, fourth year political science major at MacEwan.
Cool. All right, so today we're talking about Bill 1, a recent piece of legislation the UCP has passed through. And it's a fairly controversial bill. There's many who claim that it undermines the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the right to protest. The bill is framed as protecting critical infrastructure, but from protesters, so there is a bit of an issue there. And and I know Tom is prepared a fair bit to say actually on this.
Yeah.
I didn't have anything written down, so I think we'll let Tom start us out here. Give us a strong start.
Where do I start with this?
It's quite I got my little Kill Bill 1 pin here.
Oh, Bill 1.
Nice.
Well, I think where I'm going to start is their definition of highway, which is not a universal word. Like, it's not just like, oh, highways. It can mean streets, roads, trails, avenues, parkways, driveways, squares, bridges, and sidewalks.
Damn,
Sidewalks are highways now.
apparently.
And also, you have to go to different bills, which are sometimes a pain in the backside to find the definition of these things. But they do list them as defined in this bill. Anyways, also, their definition of transportation system says without limitation and related infrastructure, which just leaves it really vague and broad. So I don't know, it could theoretically, I guess, it could mean anywhere outside to protest.
Essentially anywhere outside of your front lawn.
Yeah. And also, for whatever reason, they include radio communication.
Maybe they're thinking someone will hijack a radio station or something. I have no idea.
I don't know exactly, because it's could this be used to criminalize communication or something? What is this? I
think it's only the protesting of said communication. If people raided a building because they didn't a conservative talk show or something, I think that would fall under the bill. But I imagine
it's defined as a device or combination of devices intended for or capable of being used for radio communication.
That's vaguish.
It's vague. There's also you can be arrested without a warrant as well.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff. It's just really bad. Of course, it goes against Section 2B of the Charter, which is let me just get the proper wording of that. Freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, including freedom of the press and other media of communication. However, I know a lot of people are just waiting for the lawsuits to go down. However, they could just use Section 33 of the Charter, which is the notwithstanding clause.
All right.
Which has been used in Alberta twice, and it just failed miserably.
Right. Didn't they put the notwithstanding clause into the Charter as a concession to Western alienation in the 80s or something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's been used twice by Ralph Klein. However, both failed miserably. It was almost used 3 times, but I'll get into that. So the first time was capping the amount of money someone receives in damages after being forcibly sterilized, which was basically overturned by popular opinion. And then there was Bill 202, which was amending the Marriage Act to only allow marriage between a man and a woman, which the Supreme Court overruled because only the federal government can determine that. And then the third time that he almost used it was gay rights in Alberta, which is Rend v. Alberta. And Jason Kenney actually called on him to use Section 33 to not allow.
Yeah, I recall that. Yeah,
yeah.
The Delwyn Green case, right? That's what it was, I think.
It was Rend v. Alberta.
Yeah, I recall that. Though I never knew the Klein used to notwithstand. What's that?
My phone's about to be dead. I'll be right back.
Okay. I never knew that Klein used the notwithstanding clause. Like, it sounds like the sort of thing he would have done, but I had no idea that he'd done that. That's pretty interesting to know.
He has used it, but they have failed miserably.
Yeah. The thing of it is that with particularly with Bill 1, even if they, we assume because Supreme Court challenge comes and the notwithstanding clause argument fails, even given that, the fact is there still needs to be arrest or set of arrests in order to a case to come to the Supreme Court, which is the problem. I mean, this is, no matter how you slice it, this is a bill that is essentially trying to bully the population into not speaking up against actions this government takes that they don't agree with. There's a bit of irony in how Jason Kenney will often fall back on the ethical oil argument. We're not a dictatorship, so you should buy our oil, not Saudi Arabia's. The problem is that he's, bills like these that completely undermine the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, that completely undermine freedom of speech. He's effectively trying to run this province like a dictatorship, even the way he forced the bill through, allowing for as little debate as possible. And that's this style for many of these sweeping pieces of right-wing legislation they've put through.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's certainly an overreach, and the irony is Kenney and his base, they talk about limited government, limited laws, but this is government overreach, and it likely is unconstitutional. I mean, it gives the Alberta government unlimited power over the right to protest, and honestly, all protests happen for the most part on public lands, and it's very problematic. And there's groups that are now pursuing it in the courts, saying that it is unconstitutional. And I think it's a type of bill that will go all the way to the Supreme Court. I think it will, and there's been a lot of negative reaction from the public, all over Canada. There's an article in the Washington Post in the United States about it. It's made national news. So, yeah, it's problematic to say the least.
Yeah, it's like the AFL who's suing them for Bill 1, right? Or that's what I thought. It's one of the unions, at least.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're also suing the government over Bill 32, I believe, the union bill that ended up restricting, or where they're trying to restrict union rights and make it harder to form unions.
Mm-hmm. And that's the neoliberal that's right out of the neoliberal playbook, right? Restrict union rights and restrict people from protesting. It's
lowering of the minimum wage in with that. I mean, but that and it's interesting too, because that's they seem to be forcing all this through at almost the same time, as if their strategy, and I believe their strategy is to force all these massive controversial pieces of legislation through all at once to create as little press about each individually as possible, so they can undermine the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but then they're also going after union bargaining rights, but then they're also trying to undermine our public healthcare system, move us towards privatized healthcare system. Meanwhile, they're also trying to privatize about a quarter of our provincial parks and close an additional. I mean, it's they seem so desperate to try to divide the attention between all of these.
I mean,
And
I
they
imagine
use
that.
the pandemic. Go ahead, Nathan.
I imagine they're attacking the unions because the unions are highly supportive of the NDP government, right? So it's like directly undermining not only some of their funding, but a lot of their support among the people. If I remember correctly, when Rachel Notley was in office, she put through a bill that restricted political donations from corporations. Which, I mean, while I agree with, it was most definitely a bill with an effort to undermine the ability to get the other party to get elected, right?
Didn't she also ban some union donations? Like, I don't know exactly the specifics of the bill, but it was like banned corporate and union donations, I think. So I think it was restricted on both sides.
Yeah, it was union donations as well.
See, I didn't remember the union, but I do know that like it was just easily circumvented by corporations because they just donated to lobby groups instead.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, we saw a rise in a lot of those lobby groups.
Yep,
definitely, yeah.
Huge rise.
Yeah, so I was looking at Hansard on some of the debates on Bill 1, and I brought, so it looks like Bill 1 was introduced in February 25th, and I think that's significant because that is actually before the COVID-19 pandemic, and it was in response to the protests against the pipeline and in West, right? So, and, but the debate went on, and I have this quote here from MLA Ganley, the NDP critic for, I believe it's Justice. She says that the most egregious flaw in this particular bill is Section 2-1, which, as it reads now, would essentially render illegal mere presence in a location. When we're talking about just standing on public land being illegal, that without doing anything else, just standing there is now illegal. She thinks it's a overreach and it's a bit of a concern. So yeah, it being vague, you could just be standing on public land. You could be in a public park or walk on the side of a highway or on a road and they can arrest you for it. So
also, Section 2(3), no person shall, without lawful right, justification, or excuse, willfully obstruct, interrupt, or interfere with the construction, maintenance, use, or operation of any essential infrastructure in a manner that renders the essential infrastructure dangerous, useless, inoperative, or ineffective. So it's kind of like what's like with sidewalks, like could it be like chalk on a sidewalk that you're being arrested for?
Right. Yeah, and they've also been talking about, like, I mean, since highways are defined as pretty much any form of, like, street or road or highway or, like, sidewalk or anything, and they say willfully entering a essential public area can be criminalized. So you could be criminalized for crossing the street if you're taking the law and, like, and interpreting it in a certain way, which is extremely authoritarian and truly worrying. I mean, I don't know if they're going to actually enforce it to that extent, but there's the potential for them to now that's legally defended, and that's greatly concerning for pretty much everyone here.
Yeah. According to the Traffic Safety Act, it can also mean a square, so
like Churchill Square, basically, eh?
I'm assuming that. However, it's all too vague.
Yeah. But if a group wants to protest anywhere, then and the government doesn't like it, they could invoke that law, right? And stop the protest.
So yeah. What do you guys predict will happen with this? Like, do you think that they're actually going to enforce this law, or do you think that they're going to, like, have to bow to public pressure? Do you think that the law will be struck down by the courts?
With this government, the way that this government has operated, this attitude of we don't have to play by the same rules, we can, we can violate the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, we can, this very entitled, very aggressive attitude of this government. I don't see them caving to public pressure. I mean, good Lord, recently a government study showed that 98% of physicians say they have no confidence in our health minister, Tyler Shandro. And then Kenny comes out and says, I still support Tyler Shandro. I think he's done a fantastic job, at yelling at doctors in their driveways and, so I don't see this government caving to any kind of, having any shame whatsoever. And there will be a big public outcry. I mean, I had the opportunity the other week to come speak at a rally against Bill 1 at the legislature where I got this little guy from. And yeah, so, and there was a fair turnout. So there are a lot of people, they're not happy with this. I just don't see them actually, honestly, giving a goddamn about it. So this may very well have to be something they'll go to the Supreme Court over, and they'll fight tooth and nail, and they will, I imagine, try to use the notwithstanding clause. I mean, this is just how this government operates.
Exactly, and this is a bill that they want to get passed. It's consistent with conservative logic, effectively. Conservatives have been extremely opposed to people protesting pipelines, and that's what this bill is ostensibly supposed to address. So this is something that they're definitely not going to roll over on, for sure. I agree with that.
Yeah, and it mainly targets Indigenous individuals protesting pipelines that are being built on their land that the government has zero right to.
Yeah. The main complaints, I believe the Wet'suwet'en territory was unceded, it was unceded, and so that's what the issue was. And the chiefs actually proposed a different route that would not run through Indigenous territory and would run by predominantly white rural towns, but that was struck down despite the fact that it would have worked. Except
this bill is in reply to those protests.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it gives special significance now. And yeah, I agree with all of you, and I agree with you, Aiden. They don't care who is against it. They're going to push through their agenda because that's Kenny's style. That's the UCP. That's what they're doing. But it gives special significance now because this was introduced as a rallying call for pipelines. And before the pandemic, before everything shut down. And since then, we've seen the Black Lives Matter movement and all the protests around that. And I think that really ignited a lot of people around opposition towards this bill. Because look, they could essentially stop the Black Lives Matter movement in cities and towns in Alberta, right? So, yeah, I think they're going to push it through, but I do believe that the people are going to fight back, and we're going to see a lot of, MLA offices have been receiving thousands of emails from across Canada, mostly from Alberta, but across Canada, right? So I do think that this is going to be part of the public distrust of the UCP. We see their poll numbers going down, and yeah, people are realizing it.
Well, and I suspect too that if this does go to the Supreme Court and it does get struck down, the bill, I mean, it'll just further bolster the UCP's ability to beat the war drum against Ottawa and to try to appeal to to these ideological separatists. I mean, especially now when they're getting nervous about losing votes to the Wild Rose Independence Party, which is slowly becoming a real threat to them. And we've already seen Kenny's what the lengths he'll go to try to appeal to these people. I mean, suggesting that we get rid of the RCMP presence in Alberta and bring in a provincial police force. He's already trying to pull us out of the CPP, the Canadian Pension Plan. I mean, there's no lengths he won't stoop to appeal to separatists.
Except how much money has Jason Kenney borrowed from Ottawa?
Tons. We're getting the most aid of any of the Western provinces, and we're a net receiver in equalization for the first time in 55 years. So,
but not just
Ottawa is basically bailing us out, and it's bailing out the UCP too. They're the ones who took the subsidy from Ottawa. We did
significantly outvote the NDP. We didn't even get the CERB because we had to go to small business, but the UCP they see themselves as a business, I suppose.
When the pandemic started, the the federal government offered a, what was it, $500 billion oil bailout, and most of Canada's oil is in Alberta, right?
Yeah.
Oh, exactly. And you know what? What's interesting is Alberta's going to be in a lot of debt after this. The deficit is going to be huge, but it's because of Kenny and it's because of the UCP. They didn't spend a lot of money on recovery. They really didn't. People have been using the CERB, but the fiscal announcement is going to be at the end of the summer, and Kenny's going to come out and say, hey, because of the pandemic, we have this much deficit now. No, it's not, because they had planned deep austerity, and what had happened was they reversed cuts to healthcare and they reversed cuts to education, and they came out to say, no, this is added funding. No, they're just reversing the cuts that they're planning, right? So funding stays the same. We're still dealing with the cuts that they put on us last year. So everything from 2018 was more sufficiently funded than it is 2 years later, and we're in a pandemic. So,
yeah, I agree. And another thing to understand about austerity is a lot of our debt crisis is due to private sector debt, not public sector debt. I've been reading a book on it, actually. It's called Austerity by Mark Blythe. And so it effectively explains that it was largely the private sector that created the debt crisis of 2008. So effectively, if you look at it, like, there's a bunch of complicated banking stuff that goes on. And if you look at our statistics for the money the feds gave, the majority of it actually went to business and private interests rather than to the people at large. So you can't blame the deficit on the public sector in this case.
Exactly. But they're the ones that are going to hurt. We're going to hurt for it.
Yeah, it's us. We have to pay to bail out the big banks. We have to pay for everything they did, and we have to pay in taxes, and we have to pay in having our services cut and having less access and in paying more tuition. So it's effectively us that pays for the bank making a mistake.
Yeah, and how much did he invest in a pipeline that might not actually be built?
$7.5 billion for something that's like even less likely to be built than Trans Mountain. Like, the CEO of Keystone itself said that.
I believe only $1.5 billion has actually gone into the pipeline so far, with like another $6 billion to be allocated when it's beginning construction. But like, I think it was like a month after he announced the investment that a Montana judge straight up said it's illegal and we're not building it.
Well,
and a Joe Biden presidency will also, if Joe Biden is elected and he keeps his word, then they say that they're not going to allow Keystone to go ahead. So there's also that.
Well,
that all depends on the Electoral College.
But it's extremely likely. I mean, even Fox News polls are now projecting Joe Biden way ahead. I mean, I do see, a lot of, Trump sympathizers try to make the argument that, oh, well, Hillary Clinton was ahead. It's like, no, not by nearly as much. I mean, these polls are pretty brutal if they come true. And the other thing, there's data seems to suggest that Joe Biden will do much better in the states that Hillary took for granted, the key 3 Rust Belt states that lost Hillary Clinton the election. But that's, and I was talking about this actually a little bit in my interview with Ron Thiering the other day on the podcast. Is that the UCP? I mean, he went ahead with this knowing full well there's a presidential election coming up, where one of the major candidates has said that he would block the pipeline, as the president that he was vice president under did. He went ahead with it because I think the UCP isn't honestly all that bothered by if they're wasting money or not, by if their decisions hurt Alberta or not. What they are concerned with is being able to rile up their base against some scapegoat. So you already see Kidney now with the attacks against Joe Biden, trying to, he knows that as long as he can rile up his base and they can be mad at Joe Biden, not at them, that's all that really matters to them, because they know they'll get their votes because of that.
Joe Biden.
Yeah, that's potential direction it can go.
Yeah.
Though I've also heard Kenny say that he's willing to work with the Democratic leadership if Biden gets elected. So, I mean, there's no telling which direction it'll go. Like, perhaps he'll be able to find a way, and by some minor miracle, they will be able to build Keystone. So, I mean, we can't rule it out yet, though. My money is on it not going ahead and it continuing to get caught up in red tape and regulations. So, the investment is not really a smart one, especially at this time.
Not.
Nope.
and oil investors are leaving. Like,
Yeah, they are. They're pulling out. They're removing their insurance policies. Like, our current proposed pipelines are losing insurance on them. Like, Trans Mountain's insurers have, some of them have dropped out. So we're losing a lot of that.
The latest investor to drop out was Deutsche Bank, right?
Deutsche
Yeah.
Bank, yeah, I think.
Deutsche Bank. I read it as Deutsche Bank. Sorry.
and what's the French company? Total?
Maybe. I can't recall what it was called.
That's-
Wasn't it Swiss? Like, a Swiss company, I think, pulled out its insurance policy on Trans Mountain or something.
yeah,
I remember.
I remember.
I remember reading that one of the big investment syndicates, they usually invest in these kind of projects, pulled out because they're planning on investing in clean energy products for the future. And then they actually invested in the French fusion reactor, but besides the point. We're getting to the point where technology has advanced far past oil, but they're still beating down on the oil drum.
Yeah, and so much of our economy is centered around it. Like, at this point, a lot of manufactured goods require on oil or coal to like produce the electricity needed to make them. So there's an issue with that. Though as we diversify away, that would become less of a problem, in my opinion. And additionally, going back to the American factor in this entire pipeline debate, like, for example, if you've looked at Joe Biden's platform, it looks like they've compromised with the Bernie Sanders camp to some extent, and so their climate policy is quite a bit more ambitious than you'd expect from a centrist Democrat, and says that it doesn't go full Green New Deal, but it invests $2 trillion in like clean energy policies and drastically accelerating the energy transition. So we can see that the goals of like a potential Biden presidency and Jason Kenney are not aligned. So that would be another obstacle to them coming to a compromise and building Keystone.
Yeah, because he can try and remove red tape here in Alberta, but he can't remove red tape in the United States because he does not have that authority in the United States or here in Alberta. Well, what has he done to remove red tape here in Alberta, though?
He created a position in his cabinet called the Red Tape Reduction Minister. Doesn't seem to actually know what his job is, neither does anybody else.
No.
Yeah, it's quite secretive, though. To be fair, I have heard that apparently the Alberta's red tape rating has been upgraded to a B- from an F or something. I don't really know the specifics of that, but at least they can claim that as a victory, regardless of like whether or not I agree with the fact that there should be a red tape cutting industry or ministry, I guess.
But I
do know that the housing industry, and specific because I work in the housing industry, specifically has gotten a lot more regulations in the past couple years. Some of them are municipal, obviously, but many of them have been provincial.
That's interesting to know.
I know as a trans person, for trans people, we've gotten a lot more regulations when it comes to our transitions.
Oh, right. Like, don't you have to go through a criminal record check to be able to legally change your gender or something?
Yeah, which you already had to be fingerprinted, which, what I've read, do not quote me on this, it's unclear if you need to pay for the criminal record check or not, but you have to pay to be fingerprinted. And well, in my case, I had to be fingerprinted twice because Canada Post lost my fingerprints in the mail.
Oh no.
But I didn't have to pay the second time, so.
At least there's that, yeah. But that's strange. Why would they need to fingerprint you?
Criminal record check or something. Just like, hey, it's this person.
Not sure why your criminal history would matter to transitioning.
Apparently, what I've read, it was to close the loophole for sex offenders changing their names. However, it negatively affects trans people.
Yeah. And I mean, I've never heard of a sex offender changing their gender. Like, they can change names and assume different identities, but I sincerely doubt that they change their genders.
There's two different processes to change your gender legally versus changing your name legally. To change your name legally, you have to be fingerprinted and get a criminal records check. And then to change your gender legally, you have to get a note. Well, you have to get a letter from, I got a letter from my psychologist who specialized in gender issues. I know, like, you like, the majority of the time people get a letter from their psychiatrist.
Oh, okay, so it's kind of a different process then.
Yeah.
But okay, that's good. I think we understand it a bit more now.
I mean, I do remember there being a case in, what was it? Sweden, I think, maybe Switzerland, where a male sex offender changed his, while he was in prison, changed his sexual orientation or gender to female, and then they, because of a law passed, they had to transfer him to a female prison, where he did go on to sex offend, but that has since been patched up in legal systems because it was a loophole, right?
Interesting.
But
Haven't heard of that personally.
I can't remember. I think it was on one of those like conservative talk show hosts. It was what's her name? Roaming Millennial.
Oh yeah, right. Oh god, yeah.
So I have no idea if it's true or not, but that's what I heard.
Interesting. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the time you can't trust the like right-wing grifters like Roaming Millennial and Stefan Molyneux and Jordan Peterson and stuff. So
the thing is that it paints trans people as sex offenders.
Basically, like that's a common argument that like TERFs use. Like they like to say that trans women are invading women's spaces or whatever. So like they like to use a bunch of their arguments are flawed and they assume the worst, whereas like the outcome that's like things are supposed to defend against practically never happens. So that's what I found about like gender critical feminist logic.
I think radical feminism in general is just something that should be ignored. Political lesbianism is one of the more amusing ones.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that.
It's the belief that women's attraction to men is like a social construct and that women are naturally lesbian. But the reason I dislike it is because like it resets in motion the idea that like you can choose your sexuality and like you can be conditioned out of your sexuality, which has been off the table for over a couple decades now and severely hurts the LGBT community, right? Because if you can change your sexuality from straight to gay, you can change
I see what you mean by that. That would like technically legitimize conversion therapy, I guess, because like it's the belief that you can change your sexual orientation, which is also the belief of people who run conversion therapy centers and whatever. So it's kind of counterproductive to the goal.
By the way, if anybody listening wants to check out, we did an episode with Michael Green of the Alt2 Foundation on Bill C8, federally banning conversion therapy. So if anybody wants to check that out, please do, because it does not have many views right now.
Excellent. So where were we on the like Alberta politics stuff? I think we're getting a bit off topic. So we should maybe go back to talking about Bill 1 again.
I'm just like looking at my cat being cute.
Yeah, but I mean, it's kind of back to Bill 1. I mean, this all, I suppose our general conversation about the UCP kind of, because it is in their playbook, this sort of this, just, standoffish, as you said before, Cal, it's a rallying cry for pipelines, but in the process, they can also use this to abuse, just some factory workers picketing on a sidewalk. I mean, they can be effectively arrested without a warrant. It's it's almost farcical, or would be if these people weren't the ones running our province. And it's just funny because I remember the UCP when they first got in, they were making a big show about free speech on college campuses. Now, they sort of did that whole what you see from like the kind of rigmarole you see from the Ben Shapiro types, like we need to ban free speech. That's free speech is under attack on college campuses. The SJWs, blah blah blah. Yet they have done everything in their power to suppress free speech of opinion. Any opposition, any opinions they don't want. In the legislature, they take every chance to limit discussion, to limit debate between the party members. at every turn. I mean, these guys are not the free speech warriors that you might that they like to pretend to be.
I mean, they pulled that stunt where they put in earplugs during a debate.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that was pretty insulting for sure.
That was laughable, to say the least. If I remember correctly, they put in a bill to protect free speech on campuses, which, I mean, like, I gotta say, like, when I went to university, I was expecting it to be like this really toxic, sort of leftist viewpoint. And, I am on the left, obviously, because, I'm in the NDP club, but, I'm not far left by any means, right? So, like, from the way that it was described by these political speakers, like, I was expecting it to be like, be a communist or be dead. And, half my teachers, when they have expressed political opinions, they've been like more conservative leaning ones, right? Like, I have never once had a teacher force any view down my throat, let alone a liberal one.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, like, professors don't force views. Like, I mean, they may express them, but they don't expect you to conform to them. And like, there's no reason why like academia has to be like leftist by any means. Like, I mean, disciplines like sociology and gender studies might be considered that, but I mean, there's no reason why like people of all political stripes can't agree that oppression is real and that like discrimination exists and that actions should be taken to stop it. So that's not specifically a leftist ideal. That can be anybody's idea if it wants to be their idea. Or that's the way I see it, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. And the no, but I guess it's necessary for this kind of right-wing narrative that I think particularly on the online hemisphere. I know there's still the whole kind of I don't know if it's died down, but the whole SGW craze. The idea of these kind of college campus SJWs. I mean, it's really not. It's not representative of the reality of the matter. There really isn't this, on college campus, this toxicity towards conservatives. I know plenty of conservatives in university. We get along just fine. They got no problem with it, but it ties into this narrative so that when a conservative government decides they want to limit free speech, they want to attack protesters, conservatives can still claim the banner of free speech.
So yeah, like if you look at the rights record.
Rose there, Dom.
We've lost Dominic. He's done.
Oh no.
Speaking out against the right team.
W's got him. Still there, Dom? Okay.
You guys have frozen. Can you hear me? Okay, good. Sorry, my Wi-Fi cut out.
Sorry. Repeat that.
Brilliant. And the war room is effectively an expression of this, right? Because the war room is explicitly designed to shut down the free speech of environmentalists and indigenous rights activists who are protesting pipelines in the oil industry. So effectively, most of what the UCP has done at this point has ironically suppressed free speech rather than promoted it. So by their own logic, they're exactly what they claim to be against.
With an cost of $13 million out of our taxpayer money. Sorry, what were you
I thought it was $30 million.
Well, excuse me. Oh, did I say 13? Oh, yeah, 30 million.
30, yeah, it's 30. Nathan's right.
I was giving them a little too much credit there.
Have you guys actually read some of the articles out of the war room?
Not specifically, though. I did read an article commenting on what's happened through it from the CBC, and it says that like while it has corrected a few misconceptions, it's mostly spread disinformation and mostly hasn't really done anything right so far. So that's all I really know.
It's absolutely hilarious. There was this one article where they were trying to like prove that oil is necessary for cooking, right? And they went to BC to go to, I think it was a fish house, and they basically asked the lead cook, without telling them that they were from the Alberta's war room, whether or not oil cooking was better for fish or not, right? And the cook, I don't know the specifics of it because I'm not a chef, obviously, but the cook basically said that if you cook fish over an oil flame, it's better than an electric oven. which I guess makes sense in some way. I don't know, because I'm not a cook. But they took that and they were like, oh, without oil, we can't have good cooks. We can't have good food. And it's just like, no, it's not what he said.
I mean, we've been cooking food for like literal centuries and millenniums before like the discovery of oil and gas to power things. So
Yeah.
that's a pretty stupid argument, honestly.
$30 million for this garbage. Sorry,
It's insane. Yeah, it's just
personal responsibility and not wasteful spending. And this is what they're. I'm sorry, Tom, I cut you off. Go on.
Is Jason Kenny criticizing my cooking?
What do you cook with?
I have an electric stove and oven.
I also have an electric stove.
Yeah, we do too.
Yeah.
Bunch of lefties with our electric stoves.
Hurting the Alberta economy.
Next thing you know, the War Room is going to start censoring this podcast.
I would love that though, because that would give us, it's kind of like
publicity, right? Yeah, it would.
It's kind of like when Trump talks about like we're going to investigate SNL when they have Alec Baldwin go and do a voice of Trump, and it's just like that does nothing but help them, help the program, and they're not even that funny in my opinion. I would love that.
Imagine we get Rebel News attacking us.
I could see that, honestly.
Yeah.
We're right up there, Ali.
Man. Realistically speaking, though, that would be pretty insane, considering they're like a gigantic corporate-funded media, and we're a bunch of university students, so they could really do damage to us, I guess. But I think we're overthinking things at this point.
I mean, Rebel Media and what's this? The American one, the Campus Reform, I think, both have a history of like just blatantly misinterpreting facts and then like going after college students, so like little groups, to prove their point.
Yeah, that's what Ben Shapiro does. Like, Ben Shapiro exclusively debates unprepared college students, and he talks really loudly and quickly over them. So when he actually has to debate someone who's a qualified expert in the field that's being debated, he ends up absolutely being humiliated and losing. So
that's the funny thing about Ben. I mean, I don't know if you guys saw that BBC interview where, and the news anchor was a conservative, like he's a supporter of the Tories, but he was asking Ben Shapiro, and not even like he was asking him proper journalistic questions, and this just shows you the quality of journalism in America, because Ben Shapiro is used to going on to Fox News and getting these softballs. This has kind of become a Ben Shapiro podcast, but and he got so flustered and angry by this guy's questions. He was accusing him of being a leftist, and then he just walked off the interview. And I think that just says something about these kind of IDW intellectual dark web folks. Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin, Steven Crowder. I mean, they're not all they can do is they're able to go after university college students who are going between their psychology classes. They're not these intellectual heavyweights that they claim to be, and that's their whole brand.
I mean, I've never seen Dave Rubin attack college students. I actually kind of enjoy his show because he what is it? I can't remember the name of the show now, but he he has a history of getting more conservative and liberal people on both sides to have a discussion without people yelling over each other, right? And that's what it comes down to, right?
I like the format of Dave Rubin's show, but I find oftentimes the guests, he'll bring on, like he brought on Stefan Molyneux, and he said, you and me, we're the real news centrist. Like he said, Stefan Molyneux is the true news centrist, which is a ridiculous thing.
Pretty laughable for sure, yeah.
But I do honestly like the format of a show. I just wish it had a better host.
Yeah, I agree with that.
That's right. And I mean, like, if you look at Caitlin Bennett likes to corner random college students on, like, the green or whatever. Like, they're just walking around, and she dresses up as, like, she wears these stupid costumes, and she interviews people and asks them dumb questions and whatever. So,
Caitlin,
that's the classic thing the right does when it's trying to propagate its beliefs. So, yeah.
Caitlin Bennett's the gun...
the gun girl. Kent State gun girl.
Okay.
Who's also really transphobic and racist.
I've seen some of her videos. Yeah, she's not She's not the most polite person on the planet. I'll say that.
That's putting it lightly, I think.
I remember watching this one video where she was going around interviewing students how they felt about like trans people being able to use whichever washroom they wanted, right? On a campus. And I mean, I think that's in law now here, but I do know that at least our campus at MacEwan supports it, right?
Yeah, it does. And it has gender neutral washrooms too.
I
Yeah.
only use gender neutral washrooms for reasons.
But like she was going around and she was like interviewing all these people about like the trans rights, and like obviously she's interviewed a lot more than this, and she's scraped together 10 minutes of what she thinks proves her points the best, right? And the 10 minutes of what she thinks prove her point the best are all people disagreeing with her. And it's just like, really? At that point, just don't make the video.
And that's
Yeah, it's obviously biased.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the one where like one of the guys she was interviewing, like she was like, should there be tampons in men's washrooms? And he's like, yeah, that's not, if you want a tampon,
Yeah.
fine. It's not hurting me. There being tampons.
That's the exact one, yeah.
Basically.
I will say
So
that
any other legislation you guys want to talk about today?
Could we like leave Bill 30 and 32 for like another time or something? I don't know.
I feel like the only problem is that by the time we actually do there's going to be a whole new wave of these ridiculous sweeping right-wing legislations to talk about. So we're almost, although I would like to do an episode on Bill 30 and Bill 32, but it's just one thing after another. And then again, they still have the issue with them privatizing all these provincial parks, or excuse me, looking for third-party partnerships. Sorry, they don't like the word privatize, even though that's exactly
what exactly are they trying to do? Are they trying to like shift the responsibility, or are they trying to like privatize the lands?
Well, they're essentially selling off these. They're claiming it as crown land and then essentially selling it off to these third-party partners, as well closing or partially closing an additional 20 parks, which is, these are provincial parks, but and 20 of them are just going to be closed just for essentially private developments. So you kind of say goodbye to those parks. And then additionally, of course, we still have more tax on the public healthcare system. I can't tell you a single nursing student I've talked to that isn't at the very least considering moving out of province once they get their degree, because they're not going to be able
why wouldn't they?
Exactly. Well, they're not going to be able to find work here. In fact, I believe both BC and the Northwest Territories are actually benefiting quite a bit from all these healthcare professionals and recently graduated students moving over there because they're getting way more nurses and doctors over there, and we're just throwing them away.
Effectively, right? And I've heard that a lot of people are considering leaving, like not just in the medical profession, they're considering leaving Alberta and going to like provinces where jobs are being created, like in Ontario and BC. And I mean, we've lost a lot of the tech sector to BC already, so like, I mean, the Kennedy government's economic policies are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, arguably.
Yeah.
Well, not at all, right? They've cut taxes on large corporations, which in and of itself isn't necessarily a negative thing. But combined with that, they've also selected very few of these large corporations to give bailouts to and subsidies to, right? So they've essentially created a playground where one or two kids are getting support from mommy and daddy, and all the other kids are left to suffer the consequences, right? And, why would they want to suffer the consequences? They'll just go find another playground.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and and those tax handouts, I mean, it's supposed to be the job creation tax cut. When he was campaigning the election, all this was gonna, immediately jumpstart the economy. Is gonna create economic growth, create all these jobs. The NDP, they're driving investment away, blah blah blah. Well, it's done the exact opposite. Prior to the pandemic, under Kenny, we were losing tens of thousands of jobs. We, they gave this massive tax handout to these corporations, and it didn't create a single. They didn't create a single job with it. These tax handouts that they were cutting all these public services to pay for. And instead, this money, instead of creating jobs, was just going to corporate stock buybacks, and shoring out the company's dividends. I mean, that's like this Reaganomics fairy tale that they propose. It's not working. This cutting taxes equals more jobs. Just doesn't. It's not working. But they will not abandon it, and that's the problem. Is that even past the they're still committed to this austerity agenda. And I do like we've had some fun here. We've kind of laughed at UCP a little bit, but it does genuinely worry me, the future of this province, from the damage that this austerity is going to do.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and I mean, yeah.
I mean, like supply side, or not completely supply side, but like tax cuts have worked in the past, right? That is actually how Obama got the banks and that out of the 2008 housing crash, right? Was tax cuts largely and bailouts. But when you have so little competition in the area, like we have maybe like a dozen primary oil companies in Alberta, right? So when you're offering bailouts of companies to that size, or two companies of that size, along with tax cuts, they're not going to compete with each other. They're just going to buy back their stock, or they're going to give each other, or give their managers raises and payouts, right? Like,
Yeah, and I mean, tax cuts have already not worked here because they already gave they named the adeptly named job creation tax cut in their first sitting, and of course they've decided to do it again. They've decided to effectively respond to the pandemic by advancing their planned cuts and planned policies for the next 2 years into directly now. So they're doing another corporate tax cut, despite the fact that the last one clearly didn't work and only drove investment away, because the corporations that benefited from it either took the money and did nothing with it, or laid off workers here and relocated. So arguably it hasn't worked in this scenario, and lowering corporate taxes doesn't necessarily attract more investment. That's the argument that the UCP uses, and that has to some extent happened in countries like Ireland, for example. But at the same time, lowering corporate taxes can also completely backfire, as happened in the United States with Kansas, because Kansas decided to completely eliminate corporate taxes. So it's a double-edged sword. Effectively, one, it can work or it can't work, and in this case, it's clearly not working. But the Kenney government's ideological bias is failing to realize this.
I mean, that's one of the big problems with economics, right? Is it's largely a social science. So like what works in America will not necessarily work here, right? What works in Ireland will almost definitely not work here because they have a completely different culture from us, right?
Yeah, and it's a strategic location too. Like, it's basically the reason that lower corporate taxes work is because it put that into the another incentive, because it's also an English-speaking port that accesses the EU, so it's attractive to investors because it's also English-speaking and the tax rates are low. So in that case, it works. Though you can't apply that to here per se, because one-size-fits-all approaches don't necessarily work, especially when comparing two completely different regions.
Absolutely not. No.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, I don't know if anybody had any other pieces of legislation or current events to talk about, but if not, does anybody want to give some final words? And we'll go ahead and sign off for today. Just on Bill 1. Sort of full circle. We
I think I said everything. Yeah, go on, Nathan.
Okay, I will say that while the terminology in the bill is very vague, the spirit of the bill itself, I don't think is necessarily a negative. Like, when the what was the name of the indigenous tribe? Wet'suwet'en. When the protests were going on, like, we did lose billions of dollars in our national economy, right? Like, it was a huge hit for us, and it part of it contributed to why we're doing so poorly in the current recession of COVID. But like, it has to be a very specific like terminology, right? Like as you said, their definition of highway could mean literally anywhere that cars are passing on, and that's That's a problem, right? Should not be that vague.
Yeah. And I mean, the solution to the crisis wasn't to like put in more regulations. It was to engage in a constructive conversation with every side involved and to come to a solution and agree to something that would benefit the most people, of course. So
I completely agree. And in the Wet'suwet'en case, that was a very easy solution, right? Like it was obviously something that they could have talked about, right? But there's going to be at some point down the line a case where the people are not being reasonable, and it may not be from like more like left-leaning protesters or environmentalists. It might be like right-wingers who don't like that windmills are being built or solar panels are being installed, right? Like there's going to be a case. There's going to be a case down the line, especially with our economy being so volatile and changing so much right now with the investments in clean energy. There's going to be a case down the line where people are not going to be reasonable and they're going to be destroying these sort of infrastructures, right? And I think this bill will, in that case, be useful if it weren't so vague.
Yeah, but I do think that we already have laws that prevent people from damaging property and blocking infrastructure, right? But I think what's problematic about this, the pipeline through Wet'suwet'en, it was their land and it was unceded, and there was a recent court case that gave the First Nation rights to their land and the resources and what's being built on there. So their perspective was that the government wasn't abiding by those rights, and the chiefs did propose a different route that they preferred, and the company and the government just said, we want to keep this route because it's cheaper and faster. So I think with Bill 1, it's tough. Like it violates the charter rights. We have a protest and we have a right for freedom of expression and whatnot. I don't think I believe it's a regressive bill.
I completely agree that it's regressive. I'm not necessarily saying the bill itself is a good idea, just that like the principle behind it will eventually at some point become necessary, right? Like whenever you have massive progression, like if you look back to the Industrial Revolution, when machines were first being invented that were automating textile creation, right? There's people, especially from rural communities, like running into factories, destroying the machines and running out, right? Now, obviously, that kind of stuff is illegal, but the bill itself is unnecessary, but the spirit behind the bill is going to be very necessary in the near future, is my thoughts on it.
Potentially. And I think that what we would all agree on is that, like, the problem with the bill is, of course, that it's very unclear and it's very restrictive if interpreted in a potential way. So the solution would be ideally to effectively, if the bill is indeed deemed necessary, to rewrite it and ensure that people's basic human rights to protest are not taken away, I would think.
I see Tom is waiting to say something.
The thing is that governments cannot just use sociological institutionalism to, well, when it comes to governance, yes. They also have to use rational choice institutionalism. So if they do not cooperate with citizens, they have to assume that citizens will not cooperate with them, especially if that land does not belong to the government. So frankly, when it comes to rational choice institutionalism, I think even though we lost so much money in the recession, we deserved it because we wanted to push through a pipeline that was not that we did not have the right to the land that we were trying to build it on.
And it wasn't even our pipeline. It was BC. It was the TC Energy, I think. Like this was TMX. So like that's kind of odd. It's misplaced that Alberta would implement this law when we weren't affected impacted by the specific protests.
I believe there were protests going on in Alberta, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
But the pipeline itself was not from one of our pipeline companies. But I mean, something like that, I could definitely see happening in Alberta, especially with the current government. So.
Well, I mean, that is another funny thing about them feeling they need to push this bill like this through is, you'd think with Jason Kenney and John Horgan's relationships, he'd be fine with just letting that be John Horgan's problem, letting him deal with that. But no, it rallies based up with this. I think there's a problem though with, like we saw with Stephen Harper when he tried to rush through which pipeline was it that he tried to, rush through Energy East, and then the our federal government ended up in court for years. So in fact, I believe still is, even under a new government. So I think there's, I think when governments get, too hasty with, too ambitious with trying to find ways to push something through, I think you really do create more problems than you solve down the line.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to a certain extent, it shouldn't even be the federal government's purview, right? Like, the company wanted to build the pipeline. They should have had the conversation with the indigenous populations themselves, and they should have done it before the pipeline was even, began constructing, right? They should have owned or at least had agreements to all of that land preemptively, no government involvement whatsoever, because it's just not necessary. The government is meant to be the federal government, at least, is meant to be a service to all Canadians, and if necessary, to stop disputes between two provinces or more provinces. But it's not meant to get in between corporations and indigenous populations and take sides.
Yeah, absolutely. And did anybody have any thing else to say real quick about Bill 1? Oh, I see, Tom.
It's just extremely authoritarian.
Yeah.
Frankly, it doesn't matter, if someone was to go to, vandalize a pipeline, blah, blah, blah. No, that's already legal, one. Secondly, the language is extremely vague and is an overreach, frankly, because there's a lot of without limitations in the wording, and it's not just blah blah blah, let's crack down on people vandalizing stuff. It's just to limit freedom of speech. Well, actually, we don't have freedom of speech in Canada. We have freedom of expression in Canada. Because
charter, the 13th part of the charter does protect our freedom of speech under that act, though. So,
freedom of expression is Section 2B.
Which one is Charter 13 then?
Let me Google it. Sorry, I don't have that one memorized.
Up to.
It's about witness testifying in any proceedings.
Okay.
The right to not having.
Don't let me quote the charter then.
Yeah, it's with witness testify.
Yeah.
Court.
I just pulled it up as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
But
section. That's freedom of expression.
We don't have an amendment like America does with freedom of speech. That's why we're
because
that's why we're able to pass hate speech laws.
Yeah, because the reason why our charter doesn't have freedom of speech is because hate speech is illegal, and so instead we use freedom of expression.
Alrighty. Was there any? Oh, sorry.
I wasn't going to say anything.
Oh. So I think if unless anybody else wanted to weigh in last minute here. Otherwise, I think we'll go ahead and sign off. So goodbye from us at the MacEwan NDP Club podcast. We'll be doing more of these, so hopefully you folks who watch it enjoy it, and yeah, see you next time.